So today's session is the first module of our larger income determination training. And what this module covers is whose income counts, who counts as a household member, who counts as a family member. If you have questions pertaining to how to calculate income, how to calculate assets, those sorts of things, we're going to ask that you register for our further trainings. We've got one a week until the first week of August, and each one is going to be a very specific and dedicated topic. We're going to try to stay with those topics to make it more effective with the recording that we post, and to make it a great resource for you guys to use going forward. You will be able to ask questions in the survey that you get at the end of the webinar, and you can always email us with questions. We're always happy to help answer questions if it can't wait until the appropriate chunk of the Lunch and Learn series. We thank you for joining us this afternoon for your lunch break, or your not lunch break since you are learning. And we hope that you enjoy the presentation. So as always, we've got our housekeeping issues. We've got our mailing address. If you need to mail us anything, it'll be that P.O. box you see on your screen. The physical address is also on East 11th Street. If you're ever in downtown Austin, you can drive by and see where the magic happens. It's going to be a little underwhelming, but we do have some really pretty flags out front, and you can wave at us as you drive by. Our website is posted here on your screen, and Amy has put that in the chat as well. And then we've got our main department phone numbers. Oh, if she hasn't put it in the chat, she will. We've got our main department phone numbers there in case you're not sure who you need to talk to, but you want to talk to somebody. One of the things that I did put in the resources, you can see at the top, you've got a sheet of paper with a paper clip that is going to have your resources. And there should be, if everything worked right, there are the handouts that go with this. There's an outline, so if you wanted to copy and paste the different links that are shared, that's available. There's also the different forms that we're going to talk about today.
Kara, can you see if people can hear you? Because I have one person that says they can't hear, and then a bunch of hands that went up.
Can everybody hear me? If you can hear me, give us a thumbs up. If you cannot hear me, give me a thumbs down. I'm getting lots of thumbs up.
Okay.
If you can't hear me,
well, I'll type because they can't hear you.
Yes, that I was going to say, if you can't hear me, you can always turn on closed captioning down in the bottom right corner. There's a little CC. We are not going to unmute for raised hands during this webinar. We've got a lot of folks with us today, and in the interest of time, we are going to use the questions box to communicate. So if you have questions, please put those in the questions box. I'm seeing a couple of thumbs down. If you can't hear, I think that switched to a thumbs up. So maybe that was an error. So hopefully we can get the hearing part fixed. If you're unable to hear, you might log out and log back in. Hopefully you have closed captioning on for that and understood what I said. Okay, you may keep going, Amy, or give it. Okay. So this training is going to run from about noon to 1, depending on how many questions you guys ask and how involved you guys are. We do have the webinar reserved until 1:30. So if it does, we're not going to have to cut you off at 1 o'clock if we're still going, but it will not go past 1:30. I will present the training. Amy and I will discuss the questions that are asked. There will not be certificates for this class. If you need a certificate for income determination training, you will need to take the full one-day training where it's all together. These are offered as a resource conversationally for you guys to use as kind of a quick pinpoint, a chunk of the training instead of having to fast forward through the big training. I would encourage you to put an out of office or shut your email down for just this quick webinar. It is only going to be an hour, hour and a half. And in order to get the most out of it, limiting distractions would be helpful. All your questions can go to the questions box, and then Amy will put resources in the chat as well. So some resources and definitions that we need to talk about before we dig too terribly deep into the qualifying process. When the affordable housing programs were set up, the IRS, because remember a lot of these were set up through tax programs, said that, hey, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to use the HUD handbook because HUD has been determining income and qualifying households for many, many years. So we use the HUD 4350.3 as a guide for how to calculate income. And we use chapters 3 and 5 predominantly. If you participate in the 811 program, you probably use the entire handbook. But for most of our programs, we're going to use chapters 3 and 5. Well, then came the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act of 2016, commonly called HOTMA. I was going to say affectionately called HOTMA, but not everybody is quite as affectionate about it as I am. And some guidance was provided through that HUD notice that you can see there, 2023-10. That has superseded the information in the 4350. HUD has indicated that they are revising the HUD handbook. However, that has not been released at this time. So we will use kind of a hybrid method. And if there is contradictory information given between the HUD handbook and that guidance for HOTMA, we will default to the HOTMA guidance that was released on February 2nd, 2024. The technical guide for determining income and allowances under the home program is also something that we use for the programs that follow the home rule. 24 CFR 5.609 is going to be the list of excluded incomes. One of the things that HOTMA did was said that if it is excluded, it'll be listed. If it's not listed, it's included. So you've got to kind of check that list, whereas before they kind of said, oh, this is included or this is excluded. Now, if it's not listed as an excluded income, then it is included as income for the household. And then the Texas Administrative Code, that link has changed. I think that's the current link. If not, the one that Amy puts in the chat will be the current link. And if you can't get that to work, you can always reach out and we can send that to you. We've got some multifamily compliance forms available on our website, and a lot of the forms we're going to talk about throughout this Lunch and Learn series are posted there. In fact, I think all of them are. And each chunk of the Lunch and Learn, I have put the forms that are discussed in that specific module in the handouts, but they will not be posted at the end of the Lunch and Learn series as a resource, because they're available elsewhere and we don't want to muddy up the presentations section of the website too much. The compliance manuals and rules are posted, and while we don't have a compliance manual, our rules are written in a way that do kind of present as a guide. The income and rent limits are available, and I believe all the program income and rent limits are out at this point for the year. The MFDL went in June 1st. So if you have not pulled those, now would be, or soon would be a good time to do that. We do have a training and presentation section of our website where these get recorded and posted. This webinar is being recorded, but it won't be posted until after all 9 weeks of the Lunch and Learn series are presented. So we're looking at probably mid-August. Because we do have some folks that help us with the web liaison stuff and getting those things posted. In an effort to be efficient, we're going to post all of those at one time instead of every single week having some stuff added to the website. Our contact list for the compliance division is at that link you see there on that second to the last link. And that is going to list everybody. So if you think, oh, I need to talk to Kara, but it's Kara with a K and I can't remember her last name, you can go to that compliance division staff link and find Kara Lozano's email and phone number there. Then if you are here with us today and you are not participating in multifamily programs, but you are a tenant-based rental assistance program participant, you may want to visit that TBRA link. While the way that we're going to tell you to qualify folks and to calculate income throughout this Lunch and Learn series is going to, for the most part, coincide with what you're going to do for your TBRA program or your home single family programs, there may be some specific forms that we share or some specific processes that we share that are very multifamily specific, which is the intention of these trainings, but they're not going to be something that somebody who is not in the multifamily group is going to understand or be able to use. If you are a tenant in one of our programs or housing developments that is here with us today, Please be aware that this webinar is intended for folks that work in the affordable housing program, but it's still going to be information that you can use to kind of know about the program that you participate in. Please feel free to ask any questions. We may ask you to reach out by email if it's something that we're not able to cover today or during the live webinar, but we do want to get everybody's questions answered as best we can. So some definitions for income. This is all amounts, monetary or not, that go to or are received on behalf of the head, spouse, co-head, or any other member of the household or member of the family. And then it can also include amounts that are anticipated to be received. Say somebody is moving to your community or getting a rental assistance from your program, but they don't have a job yet, but they know they're going to start one in 3 weeks. Well, they're going to have an offer letter, so you would use that anticipated income for that. Annual income includes all amounts not specifically excluded by regulation, and that regulation is 24 CFR 5.609. And you can actually go to your search engine of choice and type in 24 CFR 5.609, and it will pull that up for you. If you wanted to view the list of income exclusions, you can use that HUD notice as well. And that is linked again there on that last bullet. Assets are items of value that may be turned into cash, but they don't have to be turned into cash. And HUD, with the HOTMA guidance, has specifically defined what is an asset, what is not an asset. They've broken assets into several categories, considering necessary and non-necessary. And we're going to talk about that when we get into the July sections of the Lunch and Learn series. That's when we're going to start talking about assets. So for June and the first week of July, it's mostly going to be income related. Then we'll jump into assets, and then we'll have some case studies towards the end where we put it all together. Assets that are not excluded by regulation will be included in the household or in the family's calculation of income. And you can find that list of excluded assets on that link as well. So the household is all members of the applicant group. So anybody that would live in the unit or in the home is going to be considered a household. The family members are the persons that are going to be screened for eligibility purposes and whose income and assets are going to be included for eligibility purposes. Are there any questions we need to talk about before? Okay. So no questions thus far. I did not expect there to be. So the first step in the qualifying process is the application. First off, they've got to tell us about their household and their family and who has what money and who has what assets so that we know what we are looking at as far as the screening process goes. And when I talk about screening, I'm not talking about credit, criminal, and background screening. I'm talking about they filled out the application, you sat down with them in kind of an interview process, and you said, oh, I see here that you work. Oh, I see here that you have child support. Oh, I see here that you have Social Security or unemployment, that you have a checking account, you have a savings account, you own a home. That sort of a thing is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about screening. So there is no required application that has to be used, but the application has to screen for all sources of income and assets as well as student status. The application needs to be completed by the household unless the household has a reason that they can't complete it. Maybe they have arthritis that prevents them from being able to hold a pen. Maybe they don't read or write English proficiently enough to fill it out. If they have a family member or a friend that can help them fill that out, that would be ideal. If not, staff can assist, but there should be a clear clarification in the file that indicates who filled out the form, how did they get the information, and it needs if staff is completing it, they need to ask each question as if the person were filling it out themselves, and there should be no evidence of steering or perfecting. Staff should review the application with the household to determine if the household appears eligible on the initial information provided. If they tell you that as a single person household and they have an income of $82,000 and you know your single household member limit is not that high, then you probably want to say to them, if this is genuinely your income, you are probably not eligible for our community. And if you have market units, maybe you should offer that to them. But if you don't, and you just have affordable units, that may be an instance where instead of wasting their time and staff's time, you let them know, hey, all of our units have income limits. and unfortunately you don't fall under those. So that would be why we would want you to kind of review that before any money is exchanged or before a lot of time is spent. Electronic applications are acceptable as long as they include all of the required screening questions and forms and provide the same documentation as would be provided if the household came into the office to complete it. And then the owner needs to have processes in place and policies in place to help mitigate fraud, waste, and abuse with those electronic application processes. You want to make sure that all adults in the household sign a release and consent form. This is necessary to verify disclosed income, assets, and student status in cases where maybe somebody didn't sign an employment verification, but you found out they're employed and you need to send the form over, or you need to verify assets or verify student income, that sort of a thing. Your program may have specific form requirements for applications, so you want to be sure that not only are you complying with what we are asking you to do, but that you are also complying with your layered programs. If the development is layered with programs outside of the department's jurisdiction, like rural development or project-based Section 8, there may be additional program requirements not discussed in this training. One of the things I see very commonly is that HUD has a tenant rights guide and the department has a tenant rights and resources guide. These are not interchangeable. These are something you would need to have both forms in the file, one to satisfy the HUD requirement and one to satisfy the TDHCA requirements. So this is kind of what our application looks like. Like I said at the very beginning, it is available in the handout section of the go-to platform, which is a sheet of paper up there with a paper clip next to it. That's going to be the things I've attached. There's a release and consent there, an application, and then something else, but I can't remember what else I attached up there. So we do have our rule, which outlines some very specifics about the application that I wanted to be sure we shared with you today. The Tenant Act requires that documentation to support the income certification form, including applications, one per adult or married couple, first-hand or third-party verification of income and assets, and documentation of student status if applicable. The application has to provide a space for applicants to indicate if they're a veteran, and it has to have that statement that starts with important information for former military service members. I want to highlight that the applications have to be done one per adult or one per married couple. So if Amy and I are moving into your community as roommates, we each need to complete our own application. Maybe I don't want Amy to know how much I have in my bank account. Maybe I don't want Amy to know my social security number and birthday. Maybe she doesn't want me to know where she works specifically or how much money she makes. In theory, roommates would have had these conversations, but it is not fair to assume that they would want that, explicitly spelled out in an application for each other. So our rule requires one application per adult. Oh, you assigned a question to me. Do we want to do that now?
No, I just
okay.
know what that does.
We learn a lot about GoToMeeting every single time we have a webinar. So you want to be sure that you're having folks complete their own applications and that you are getting these for each adult so that you can effectively screen and qualify your households.
There is a question, though.
Okay. What is the question?
The question is, on the release and consent, does the applicant and all the adults need to complete individual forms, or can they sign the same form?
So that is a good question, and I get that emailed to me quite a lot. For the release and consent, it can be signed, one form can be signed by all adult household members, or you can have each adult household member complete their own form. That is something I would, kind of have a property policy in place so that somebody doesn't come back and say, well, you let them all sign one and you made each of us sign our own. I don't know necessarily why that would matter, but sometimes things matter and we don't have to understand them. We just have to know that they matter. So that is something that I would determine on site how you want to handle that, but you can see that release and consent form on your screen now. It does have room for 4 different people to sign. So if you have more than 4, you would definitely need a second form. If you have 4 or less, you would be able to use this one form. If you are a company that really likes to have your own header at the top, you can prepare or determine one of your, or develop one of your own forms with your own header, but you want to be sure that it does include the information that we have on the one that we have posted. I always let folks know the forms that we have posted are going to include what we would expect to see. So if you want to reinvent the wheel and develop your own forms, you can. But you would want to be sure that they meet the threshold that we have in our forms that we've shared that can be used at no cost to you. So whose income counts? Who counts as a household member? The head, the spouse, the co-head, dependents, and other adults count towards the household. Unborn children as dependents, you would have folks self-certify that. Household members that are there through joint custody and are present 50% or more of the time, that's going to be minor children. Persons that are away at school but live with family during breaks. So if they tell you that they have a kiddo in college who lives in the dorms, comes home in the summer, comes home at Christmas, spring break, Thanksgiving, that person needs to be included in the household. Anybody in the process of being adopted or anybody that is temporarily absent due to placement in foster care needs to be included in your family determination of eligibility. It is important to know who counts in the household because our income limits are based on the size of our household. And so if we don't know if we have 4 people or 5 people, it's going to make it really hard to determine who we need to include or which income limit we need to use. So you want to be sure that you do know who is included in your household. This is an example of an income limit for Travis County here in Austin for 9% housing credits with those placed in service and carryover dates. But you can see there kind of what those look like. So whose income counts? We've got this handy chart here. The family members listed at the top. There are 6 different types of family members. We've got our head, spouse, co-head, other adults, and dependents under 18 and full-time students 18 or older. You can see for earned income, if they are 18 or older, earned income is going to count. Full-time student income has those 2 little asterisks. We're going to talk about that during the 4th week of Lunch and Learn, where we talk about special income circumstances. So stay tuned for that. For assets, everybody in the family counts. We need to screen for assets, and income from assets is going to count for any of those. Anybody that's under 18 in the household that is part of the family group, their earned income will not count, but their unearned income will count. So if you have a 14-year-old that is receiving Social Security, that is going to count as income for that person. But if they also umpire at the local baseball fields or they referee Pee Wee soccer, that's not going to count. That would be considered earned income. For live-in aides, foster adults, and foster children, earned income is excluded, as well as assets and other income. These folks are considered household members for purposes of unit size. They're not going to be considered family members for purposes of eligibility. Do we have questions before we keep going? Nope. Okay. So the first household member we're going to talk about is live-in aid. Income and assets from a live-in aid can be excluded as long as all of the following apply. The live-in aid has to reside with the applicant member. They must be essential to the care and well-being of the applicant member. They may not be obligated for financial support of the applicant member and would not be considered a member except to provide the necessary supportive services. You do have to verify the need for a live-in aid with a medical practitioner or a healthcare provider, but you should not seek out confidential medical information. And if they provide that confidential information, you should destroy or pulverize that form, I guess, and ask them for a form that does not have the confidential medical information, because you will then have to follow the HIPAA requirements if you've got that in your tenant files. A relative may be considered a live-in aid if they meet the requirements, but a spouse may not be considered a live-in aid. So if they tell you that this is their spouse and that they're the live-in aid, the spouse is still going to have to be screened for eligibility. Even though they may perform the same duties that a live-in aid would do, they are the spouse and they would be part of the household as a family member no matter what. So we have a poll here, and I'm going to leave this up on the screen for just a second. And let you guys kind of look at that. But we've got our sample household. We've got William as the head of household, Sylvia, who is William's spouse or the co-head, Mark, who is a live-in aide. True or false, the household is comprised of 3 people with 2 family members. Let me find my mouse here. The mouse has gone to sleep. Okay. And now let me figure out how to do the polls. I don't usually have polls. All right, I'm going to launch that. It is going to take over your screen for just a moment. So the question is, William and Sylvia, who are a married couple, have a live-in aide. Does the live-in aide count, or is this a 2-person household or a 3-person household with 2 family members? And I know the poll covers what you're working on or the presentation. Leave it up for just a little bit longer. Apologize. You do have to put your sandwich down to answer the polls. Hopefully everybody has a delicious lunch today. A couple more seconds and then we'll end this one. All right, I'm going to end and share the results. So 78% of you guys agree that this is true. And 22 of you either weren't sure or did not agree that this is true. So the answer is here. The answer is true. Live-in aides do not count towards the family for the purposes of eligibility. So this would be a 3-person household. Mark would be qualified as a live-in aide, assuming that we determined his live-in aide eligibility and their allowance for a live-in aide correctly. So we would not count Mark's income or assets for purposes of this household's eligibility. And while Mark might be listed on the income certification, he should be listed as a live-in aide and not as a family member whose income needed to be screened. Are there any live-in aide questions that we need to talk about? Okay.
There is. Let's see here. Is it possible to have more than one live-in aide? For example, a husband and wife that live there and take care of a household member. They work separate shifts. So one is with the household member while the other is working.
So yes, you can have multiples. I think we've had some instances where folks have reached out because there've been like a sibling group that was going to take care of a parent or parents, and they wanted to know, could all 3 siblings be considered live-in aides? Well, they all could be if they're all meeting those requirements, because maybe they take a week on and then they go for 2 weeks and then they come back for a week, that sort of thing. So I think there are definitely scenarios or situations where there would be 2 live-in aides. You can, especially if somebody needs full-time care, you would not expect one person to be the only person responsible for somebody's 24/7 care if that was the need. Sometimes folks only need a live-in aide at night. Maybe they have some sort of apnea that requires a machine to alert somebody if the person needs attention. So there's different scenarios. Each scenario of these is going to have to be treated a little bit differently, or treated the same but looked at a little bit differently. So you're going to want to be sure that you're getting kind of all the information you need other than the specific medical condition that's causing the need for a live-in aide. And then you're going to want to make sure you document your files correctly and cohesively so that we know, who is the live-in aide, that sort of a thing. Does that get us wrapped up on live-in aide questions?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
How are live-in aides with children handled? Can the children be included as a live-in aide?
So a child of a live-in aide is an extension of the live-in aide. But remember, the live-in aide would not be part of that household otherwise. So if you have a child that maybe I can think of several different scenarios. But if that child would be part of that household for any other reason, then that is almost going to negate your live-in aid scenario there, because they are an extension of the live-in aid, and they would not be able to be part of the household otherwise. So if you run into that, definitely reach out if it's unclear or you're not sure that that's the case, and we can dig into your specifics a little bit deeper.
And in the scenario that we had earlier, where it was the husband and wife that are, so now we're starting, that's not it. When they apply, would we then use the 3-person household income limits? For example, we have a married couple and one live-in aid. Do you use the 3-person income limit?
You would not. If you have a scenario like what you see on your screen now, where you have a married couple and a live-in aid, you're going to use the 2-person income limits. Mark is there purely as a live-in aid. If William and Sylvia move out, Mark is going to go with them. If their income changes, it does not impact Mark. Mark is there as a live-in aid. Mark is not there because he chose the community and he wanted to live there. Even if Mark is their son or their grandson or their nephew, Mark is the live-in aid. And assuming he's qualified properly and the household is screened properly for the live-in aid allowance, then Mark's income and assets would not count, and you would use the 2-person income limit, not the 3-person.
Do grandchildren qualify as live-in aids?
A grandchild can be a live-in aid as long as they meet all those requirements that are listed here. And you would want to be sure that your files are properly documented. Now, if it's a grandchild that lived there as a minor and then turned 18 and they said, oh, well, now they're my live-in aid, that might be cause for question. But if it's somebody who said, nope, this is my grandchild, they need to move in, I need a live-in aid, here's my medical practitioner verification, that sort of a thing, then that would be acceptable.
Can you explain the doctor's note with personal information that should not be in the file?
Your note from the doctor needs to say yes or no, they need a live-in aid. It doesn't need to say, yes, they need a live-in aid because they had a stroke 2 years ago and they have limited mobility on their right side. That's not the information we need. It is a simple yes or no. Do they need a live-in aid, and is the household benefiting from a live-in aid? I think that's all I would expect to see.
And it's talking about how you count, you don't use them for the income limit, but how does that work with occupancy limits?
So for occupancy limits, some of that is going to have to be program specific. But for the example on the screen where we've got a married couple and one live-in aid, I would expect to see this in either a 2 or a 3 bedroom. I would not expect the live-in aid to share a 1 bedroom with these folks. So that is why they count towards the household, but not towards the income limit, because you may have to have a larger unit if they've got a live-in aid and they need to have an extra room for that person.
How would you list a live-in aid on the lease? Would they be an occupant?
I'm not an attorney. I'm not going to tell you how to put a live-in aid on the lease. That is something you would want to visit with your ownership, management, and property attorneys about. There is definitely some conflicting guidance out in the world about how to do that. So I'm not going to stand on one side of that answer or the other.
Would we do a criminal screening, but not a credit check? Is that correct?
Same answer as before. You want to have a policy in place on how you're going to screen live-in aids. We do see in a lot of tenant selection criteria that you guys do a criminal background, but the live-in aid is not responsible for the rent. So you have no need to necessarily know their credit, but that would be, again, something that you would want to make sure that you're handling in accordance with the legal guidance that your property attorneys or company attorneys would give.
What documentation should be in the file regarding the live-in aid?
This right here, that blue box at the very bottom that says requirements for a live-in aid. You need to have a verification of the need for a live-in aid. You need to have who the live-in aid is, and whatever if you require an application for a live-in aid that just includes, basic kind of contact information, I would expect to see that. But for eligibility purposes, A verification of a need for a live-in aid and who is the live-in aid is all I would really expect to see in the file.
And can a live-in aid be denied if the live-in aid has a criminal background?
You need to ask your attorney if you what you need to have as far as live-in aids and their denials and criminal backgrounds. I don't have any authority or ability to answer legal questions like that.
And that is all on legal aid.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about foster adults and foster children. This is a change through the HOPMA guidance that came out and went into effect January 1st, 2024. Foster persons as defined by state law are now excluded from the calculations for family eligibility, but the foster assignment must be through a court or welfare agency, and documentation of the assignment must be present in the file. So if I apply at your community and I tell you, oh, my nephew lives there, I'm fostering him while my sister is out of the country for a year for work, that's not a foster arrangement. That is me taking care of my nephew while my sister is out of the country or off on a job or doing whatever it is she's doing. But if I tell you that, oh, my nephew was taken away from my sister and now I have him through a foster kinship arrangement, here is the court order for that. That is a foster arrangement, and he would not count towards my household or for eligibility purposes, but I would probably need an extra bedroom for him. And so it would impact my household, my unit size that I would need to rent. Maybe I needed a 2 or a 3 bedroom instead of just a 1 bedroom if it was just going to be myself. Payments received for the care of foster children and foster adults are not counted. This rule only applies to payments made through official foster care relationships with local welfare agencies, and you need to have that documentation in the file. We do see this, but if we see a file, even if it has a foster person, and then we also see a set of paychecks that even though they might be from like a nursing agency or a care agency, if we don't have that arrangement in there or that court order that says here's what that pay is for, we're going to assume that's employment and we're going to count that. And I have had that cause issues in a tenant file. Thankfully, the property where I ran into that was able to provide the backup to show that that was for the care of the foster adult and that it was excluded because it was through DFPS. But it was not something that was readily in the file. They did have to go dig for that when I shared that with them during the exit interview. So we've got a sample household here. We're going to have another poll in just a second. We've got Jesse, who is the head of household. Aaron is a foster adult. Lynn and Jane are foster children. True or false, this is a 4-person household with 1 family member, meaning that you might need bedrooms to cover 4 people, but eligibility and income limit wise, you're only looking at the 1-person income limit. I'm going to launch the poll now. It's going to take over your screen. I'll give it a minute. I always feel like this is dead air. I don't like dead air. Got some good poll participation here. Got about 30 seconds left. Leave it posted for you guys. All right, I'm going to end and share the results. Kind of the same answer that you guys had in the first one. 79% of you agree that that's true. 21% of you either weren't sure or disagreed that this would be a 1-person household. So the answer is true because foster persons do not count towards the household for the purposes of eligibility. This would be a 4-person household with only 1 family member counting towards eligibility. Everybody else listed as a foster person and would not be part of the family for purposes of eligibility. So if Aaron, Lynn, or Jane had income, that would not be included in the household's income. But if Jesse has income that exceeds the one person limit, Jesse would not be an eligible household. So you would have to screen them correctly. And this is an instance where if this is not handled correctly, it could cause an issue of noncompliance that maybe you would not have had in the pre-HOPMA world. So you would want to be sure that you are handling these households with foster persons correctly. Are there any questions about foster persons before we keep going?
Yes.
Okay.
If a foster parent gets income from the state, do we count that as income?
No. If payments received for the care of foster children or foster adults are not counted, as long as the payments are made through an official foster care relationship with local welfare agency. So you want to be sure that you have that backup and that documentation, not just taking their word for it in this case, but that part did not change. That's always been excluded income. What else? Nothing else? All right. So with the qualifying process, you're also going to have to verify. So what we're talking about today with the verifications is what you're having them fill out while they're in the office so that you can then verify through your process what their income, what their assets are. There are 3 acceptable verification methods. The first one is firsthand documentation, where they bring you pay stubs or they bring you a bank statement. The next one is third party, where you send an employment verification or you send a bank verification or you send a child support verification. And then oral clarification is used to clear up any incomplete things or any unclear things. And that can either be through you calling the employer to ask, oh, are they getting a raise? Do they have a bonus? Tell me about the bonus structure, that sort of a thing. Or if they want to self-certify, that they babysit and make $100 a month or something like that. You want to make sure that all your tenant files maintain the verification documentation and that you do not have a missing piece of the puzzle. So the good theory is that when you get a file, it should tell a story. And so I should be able to, when I monitor your files, go from, oh, here's what it was when they came into the office. They filled out an application, and I can walk through what the application tells us and that you verified each thing. And if there was a question on something, there should be an oral clarification or a self-certification to explain that. The verification documentation must be within 120 days of the effective date of the household's income certification. There are some exceptions to that. If they have Social Security, and not disability or supplemental Social Security, but just plain old Social Security where they get the same amount every month for a year, regardless of changes, you would be able to use that letter they got in November for the upcoming year for that. If they have, for example, teachers' retirement, and it is a lifetime benefit, and they get a letter when they start to receive that lifetime benefit, you could use that. You would want to clarify whether or not there have been any COLA increases or cost of living adjustments. But that would be an instance where you might have an older verification that's outside of that 120 days. Go ahead.
We have a foster question that came in a little bit late.
Okay.
So before you
That's
keep
all right.
going,
That's all right.
let's get this foster answered. What about Social Security or SSI payments received by the foster?
So for a foster person, if they receive earned or unearned income, it is excluded. Even if it is paid to the head of household, if it is on behalf of that foster child or that foster adult, that is tied to that foster person, and that is excluded income as of HOPMA. So that has made that exclusion. You'll want to reference that chart that we looked at. I want to say it's like slide 10. That tells who the family members are versus who the household members are. That's going to tell you that unearned income is excluded. So you want to be sure that you're following that and not inadvertently denying an otherwise eligible household or including things versus in the eligibility process that should not be included in the eligibility process and accidentally approving somebody. We're good to keep going?
Yep.
Okay. So the other thing that came with HOPMA is the verification hierarchy. And so HUD has said, hey, there's all these ways to verify income and assets. Here's how we think they rank in order of effectiveness and importance and usability. Because it's HUD, the first one is the Enterprise Income Verification System, or EIV. So if you have a program that allows or requires the use of EIV, that one wins. That's over everything else. If you don't have a HUD program and you can't use the EIV, the next one in line is going to be a web-based income verification type. That's like your work number type. That is going to be the second highest ranked item according to HUD as far as integral testing and usability for verifying income. The next one in line, and this is where it shifts from previous HUD guidance. The next one in line is the first-hand or tenant-provided documentation. HUD used to say, hey, you need to try to do a third-party verification first and then get pay stubs if you can't do that. Now HUD is saying, oh, we changed our minds. You get pay stubs. You can get pay stubs first. We think they are higher ranked and higher of a verification method, or more usable of a verification method than a third-party verification. Third-party verification is still allowed. It is just medium ranked. They're saying, hey, it's usable if you can't get pay stubs or they don't have enough pay stubs, that sort of a thing. But you must send that to the person verifying the information, and it must be returned to the property from the employer or the bank or the child support agency. It should not be hand carried by the applicant. So when you have them sign that top part of the employment verification, they should not then take it to their employer and bring it back to you. If they bring it back to you, it needs to be destroyed or pulverized, and then you need to start that process over, and it needs to be something where the integrity can be tested by the form, or of the form. An oral clarification or verification can be used to clarify missing or incomplete information. That should not be a standalone form. So you should not say, oh, the employer doesn't have a fax machine, we had to do this over the phone. You should get pay stubs in that case, or take the verification to the employer if that's an option, or mail it to the employer. I can't think of an instance where somebody doesn't have a way to receive or send mail, but that would be an instance where you'd want to do that. We see a lot of properties in rural areas where the employers come in and complete it. So there's definitely some options there you want to explore, but that should not be a standalone verification. A self-certification should be used for any income that cannot be verified by other methods and to clarify unclear information. Section 811 PRA requires the use of the EIV system, so that is going to be the preferred method for that program based on the income source. So a little bit more about the EIV system. This is for properties participating in HUD's assisted housing programs like the 811 PRA program. The EIV system is web-based and provides owners information on employment, wages, unemployment, and Social Security benefits. There are two types of EIV reports, verification and income reports. The income reports are the income report, the income discrepancy report, no income reported on the 50059, no income reported by HHS or SSA, and the new hires report. These are used at recertification, both interim and annual, to reduce errors in subsidy payments. Owners must print and include the print date and maintain in master binders or tenant files as required to document compliance with running these reports. That is something we would look at during an 811 review, I believe. Owners must address discrepancies between EIV data and what was reported previously on HUD 50059s or on current screening. So if it shows that they have a job on the EIV and they tell you, oh no, I don't have that job, that's going to have to be explained in the file. Web-based income verification forms must come from a reputable source. You need to keep the full report in the file. I know that they are very lengthy. So if you want to highlight the pages that are needed or tab them to make it easier for you to, when you're processing a tenant file, that's fine. But we would need to, during a monitoring review, have access to the full report. The work number is the best example we've got of this. So if you use the work number, this is where that one falls. First-hand documentation is the tenant-provided documentation, and this is acceptable assuming the documentation identifies the applicant and employer, pay period, pay date, gross pay. If it's from a bank, it needs to include the account holder, the bank, the interest rate, if any. If something looks fishy, question it. If you know that you've got a lot of applicants from HEB and you know what an HEB pay stub looks like, and somebody comes in and says, oh, I work at HEB, here's my pay stub, and it looks completely different, you are the protector of the asset. You have the right and responsibility to question that to mitigate fraud, waste, and abuse. Pay stubs, bank statements, child support payment history, Social Security award letters, tax returns all fall under this umbrella. HUD guidance under the HOTMA changes requires a minimum of 2 pay stubs. So we at the department do not have a maximum, except that there are some programs that require 60 days of source documentation, like Home, National Housing Trust Fund, NSP, Home ARP, TCAP RF, that sort of a thing. If you don't have one of those programs at your property, you would be able to use the 2 pay stubs. The owner is allowed to be more restrictive if they want to use 4 pay stubs or keep the 6, 8, 4, whatever your previous was, but there has to be a minimum of 2. Please have a policy in place so that when we come out and we see 2 in one file, 3 in another file, 6 in one, 8 in one, it is understandable as to why. Maybe you have a weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, and monthly requirement. Maybe everybody just uses the 2. You need to have a policy in place also, because if you ask Amy for 6 and you only ask me for 2, Amy's going to get upset if she's denied with her 6 but would have been approved with 2. There needs to be a clear-cut policy for that so that you're not inadvertently creating a fair housing or fairness situation for your property. You want to review itemization of all amounts included in gross pay and year-to-date earnings. If they get a bonus, you need to know how often they're going to get that and what's the amount. Maybe it was a one-time bonus. We saw a lot of that during COVID, that there was a one-time bonus because they worked extra during this certain time frame. But maybe it's regular and quarterly or annual or monthly, and you need to include that when you forecast their earnings. You also want to review for assets. You want to see, is it being deposited into a checking or a savings that needs to be certified or possibly verified. That little blurb at the bottom just tells you that the department permits owners to go straight to check stubs instead of trying to get a verification of employment first. There was a time where that was an issue. That's less of an issue now. I think most of you are aware of that, but we wanted to put that in here so that you would know it was not necessary to first try to get a third-party verification and then switch to pay stubs. You're allowed to use pay stubs right off the bat. So the programs with pay stub guidelines that can use the minimum of 2 as a maximum are Housing Tax Credit Bond, State Housing Trust Fund, TCAP, and Exchange, or 811. You have to gather enough pay stubs to determine frequency of pay. There's no set number of required, but you do have to have a minimum of 2 pay stubs. Home, Home ARP, TCAP RF, National Housing Trust Fund, and Neighborhood Stabilization Programs must obtain 60 days of source documentation when a first-hand documentation source is used to verify income. Third-party verifications are going to be your employment verifications, your asset verification, child support, that sort of a thing. This is the medium-ranked verification type that HUD has put out through the HOTMA guidance. This form has to be sent directly to and from the third party. The verification cannot be hand-carried by the applicant, must be completed in its entirety. If you mail it, please maintain the envelope in which the verification was sent and received. If you fax it, please include the company name and source's fax number. If we see that it's a Kinko's fax and they work at the Home Depot, we're going to probably question that, because the Home Depot has a business office where staff can go to get a fax, or where you could send something to their HR representative that's at the store. If you email it, make sure you keep the email in the file with the form that was returned, along with any correspondence that pertains to that verification. And if they work at the Home Depot and the email comes from a Gmail, we're going to question that as monitors, because folks at larger companies have an at the Home Depot email address. Now, if they say they work at Poli Landscaping and I, Kara Poli, send it back to you saying I'm the office manager for Poli Landscaping and it's polilandscaping@gmail.com, that might be legitimate. Maybe we're a small company and we don't have a web domain, but you would call and verify that so that the file was properly documented. Then with oral clarifications or verifications, this should only be used to clarify missing or incomplete information and any discrepancies. This is acceptable if it's documented and from a reliable third-party source. This is the other thing I think I put in the resources up there with the paperclip. This must include the date, time, and person contacted, as well as their contact information and their title, and what was clarified and who clarified it from your property staff and their signature. You want to be sure that's clear and concise, but not necessarily too concise, because sometimes they are a little bit confusing and we're not sure what you called to clarify. But if for the most part, you guys do that pretty well. A self-certification should be used for any income that cannot be verified by other methods. For example, if a household reports that they babysit and are paid in cash, a self-certification could be used to verify that income. Self-certification is also going to be used for self-employment income and that sort of a thing. Here's an example of an oral clarification, and this is in your resources for this webinar. The department has made available a telephone verification that can be used. If you want to take this form and develop your own, you can, but this is a great resource or type of form to use when and if you have to clarify something that was missing, or if you used pay stubs and something else needed to be clarified, this is a good form to use to do that. Do we have any questions before we talk about ways to mitigate issues? No questions?
Not yet.
Okay. So some tips to minimize challenges with the qualifying process. Make sure that all forms are completed in their entirety. Go through them with your household when they fill them out to say, oh, you missed this question. Let me flip this around to you so that you can answer, yes, I receive child support, or no, I don't. You don't fill that out after they've left. You have them do that while they're there. And just as a customer service note, it is helpful to do that with them instead of making them come back. But I know you guys are busy and your offices are busy, and so sometimes that can't be avoided. Make sure all household members are listed. Make sure everything's current within 120 days. Any changes or corrections need to be initialed by the applicants. Please don't let us find correction fluid, whiteout, or evidence of tampering or perfecting. Go through a peer review if you can. If you're in a 2-person or 3-person or 4-person office, have somebody else look at the file and say, hey, does this make sense? Does this tell the story that I'm trying to get it to tell? Or do you see something that maybe I'm overlooking because I'm in this file? And if you have a third party or compliance file review, view that as a resource, not as a hindrance. I know sometimes when they come back 3 and 4 times for corrections, it is frustrating. Y'all remember I was on site for 20 or 15 years before I came to work for TDHCA, so I do feel your pain. I do understand the process that's in place, but those guys are looking at it with just a clean set of eyes, and they are looking at it from an owner, investor, management company point of view to make sure that file has all the answers and all the information needed. That's all I have for Module 1 as far as the presentation. So we can answer questions and help.
We got a couple questions.
Okay.
On a small business, they do not have an email for their company. Can you explain how you would get the documentation?
So if it's a small business and they have an email that you can send it to, you can email it and then just clarify that it was somebody involved in the business. A lot of times that's still going to be somebody's personal email. If they don't have email, maybe they can come in and fill out the form. Maybe you can meet them somewhere, and you as a staff member of the property can oversee the completion of the form. Maybe you can mail it to them and they can mail it back to you. Maybe there's a way you can mail it to them and they can fax it back to you. There's several different options. So if you run into that a lot, you're probably going to want to have a policy in place to process those, but there should not be an instance where the applicant takes the verification of employment or bank verification and gives it to the bank or to the employer and returns it to you. They should not be involved in that part.
Would highlighting the missed questions, I'm guessing on an income verification, be deduced as leading?
If you are not able to go through the application with them while they're in the office, where you could easily turn it around and say, oh, you missed number 12, please answer that one, and you highlighted it so that you wouldn't forget, I would say use like sticky tabs or something, or sticky note or something, instead of highlighting on the actual form. But I also can't think of a scenario where I saw highlighting on a form and felt like it was staff leading the applicant to put something specific on the form. Amy may have more to add to that, but I don't know that highlighting necessarily is disallowed. I know there was a time where it might have been. Amy said she's good with that answer. Any other questions? No, you're good. Any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Oh, goodness. Some of these questions, I'm not trying to be mean, but we've already had like the announcement that we're trying to keep the questions that go to each section to that section. So I keep saying the other lunch and learns we will talk about. We are also have this Friday, we have office hours, which we do the open forum, and you can ask us anything. But for this, because it's recorded, it's going to get posted as a recording. We're trying to keep the income questions in the income section and the asset questions in the asset section. And so this is just really verifications and who counts as a family member. So if I don't answer, or if I say stay tuned for the next lunch and learn, I'm not being mean. I'm just trying to put all the recordings to make sense.
And I appreciate that, because that was, you guys asked for it, we put it together, and we're trying to make it helpful.
So this one I think could go in this because it is about verification. Okay. How do you verify households that work for the family?
Well, I'm going to answer that two different ways. If they work for the family, that is also the household. So maybe I have a landscaping company with my husband and our son mows yards for us. Well, we're going to have, my husband is probably going to be the self-employed person, and or at least that's what helps my example. And if I'm paid out of that, then I'm going to have, my income is going to be verified that way. And it's going to, my husband is going to fill something out that says, oh, she works for our landscaping company and we pay her $1,000 a month to keep the books and run payroll. And then our son works for us and he, is paid a certain amount to mow lawns. He's 19, so his earned income counts. We're going to have that done that way. And then it's going to be deducted from the tax return, which we will talk about in earned income section of Lunch and Learn, which I think is next week. And then, but if it's that they work for family, maybe family owns a cleaning company, the person is applying at your property, but the owner of the cleaning company is not, you would verify that the same way you would anything else. If they're self-employed, you treat them that way. If they're paid cash, you would process it that way. We understand there's no perfect scenario, perfect answer, but you work with what you've got, and you would verify that the same way. Just figure out where it falls and kind of roll with it.
Okay, the next one is, how much time should you give a tenant to give you the necessary documents?
We don't have a set time. I would encourage you to have something set in place. I think when I was on site, we had like a 48-hour window that if you didn't provide it and there wasn't a reason that you couldn't provide it within that 48 hours, that we would move forward with a denial. I could be wrong on that. But there's not a department policy on that. So that would be something you might want to visit with your owners and your management groups on to determine, how that needs to be handled.
And then this can kind of be a verification question.
Okay.
So babysitting is considered self-employment. So do we verify that with a profit and loss statement, a self-certification?
All right, let's be real. If they're babysitting and it's just regular old babysitting, they're not going to have a profit and loss. They're going to tell you, I babysit on the weekends. I make about $100 a weekend. They're going to write that in the self-certification. We're going to move forward. That's all I would expect. Now, if they say, oh, I'm a nanny and I do this all the time, that might be an instance where you have a little bit more documentation available. But again, you're going to use what's available to you and meet the applicant or the tenant where they're at and get what you can to verify.
Did you talk about?
I talk about that in the special circumstances of income. So
okay.
Not next week or the next week, but the third week.
Okay.
July 2nd, I believe. It's July 2nd or 3rd. I did put the link in the chat for the rest of the Lunch and Learns. All 9 of them are posted and available for registration. They do so far all have quite a heavy registration load, so I'm super excited about that. I hope these are a great resource for you guys. And then I put the office hours registration link in the chat as well. If you wanted to do that, you can also go to our website, click on the calendar link at the very top, and find anything that's upcoming that would be able to be registered for.
Did you say something about a nanny?
I use that as a babysitting example, that
Okay.
if somebody was a nanny, they might have more documentation because it's their job, not just I babysit on the weekend kind of a thing. Okay. She's reading through the questions to see what's coming up later and what's verification related. Thank you guys for joining us today. I hope that you enjoyed it. There will be a survey when you leave. So I see people are jumping off now. If you're jumping off, complete that survey. It really helps me.
This one is one.
I think so.
The documents after pre-screening, should they be the same date as the application?
So I would not expect to see everything dated the same date. I would expect to see if somebody came in to apply with you today, maybe all the forms that they signed are dated today. Maybe you maybe you had to send an employment verification because they just started the job. That might be dated tomorrow or Friday. And then maybe they, aren't able to get everything back to you. And so it's dated throughout the course of, a week or so. I would expect that to not see everything in the same date. However, there are times where we're in a tenant file that applied first thing in the morning and had Social Security and was moved in by the end of the day because they needed to, or you need it. You were in lease up and you were hustling through applications. So I think as long as it's reasonable, it's realistic, and it's documented, we're good to go.
Okay. So this says our community uses a third party to verify income, and that third party only accepts bank statements and check stubs. If we have someone with an offer letter or something outside of just a regular check stub or bank statement, how will we show that this income is verified?
So you should not be limiting what, in my opinion, what they can provide to you. If it's an allowed verification method, it needs to be allowed. Our goal here is to serve low-income Texans, not to make it so hard for them to apply for affordable housing that they can't ever get it. So if you tell them they have to have pay stubs, well, not everybody gets a pay stub. Now you've got a disparate impact that you might be inadvertently denying somebody who is self-employed or who works for cash but still can verify their income, or somebody who hasn't started their job yet. I would be very cautious of that type of policy. And I would have a policy that allows for these other steps. Maybe if they have pay stubs, that's required. Maybe if they don't have pay stubs, you need to have a second thing that they could use for the income verification.
I did see here something. What are you doing with the slides? I can't remember.
You guys all should have gotten the slides emailed to you yesterday or today, possibly Monday as well. I've been sending out emails because we had over almost 600 people registered for this. If you registered after 8 o'clock this morning, you probably did not get them emailed. You can save them through the attachment or through the resources here, or you can send me an email. I will put my email address in the chat, and I will get them emailed to you.
Can you talk about what trainings do get certificates and what do not? Because this one, they're kind of...
Oh, okay. So anything that's a short mini training is not going to get a certificate. Office hours do not have certificates. What gets a certificate is the full housing tax credit training, or the full MFDL training, or the full income determination training. where you can take those. We coordinate with the Texas Apartment Association and do those. Sometimes we do those through the department, through like this kind of a scenario, but it's an all-day training and it's the whole picture all in one webinar. That gets a certificate. But these little mini trainings, these little snippets do not. You will get a thank you for attending email if you use the link that was specific to your registration. If you're in an office and everybody registered, but only one person clicked the link and you're all watching from the same computer, only the person who used their link is going to get the thank you for attending email.
Can you tell them where they can get the full training with with a certificate without? Because I'm not sure which one they want.
So if you go to our website, to the presentations website, and I think Amy put that link in, or you can get that link pretty easily if you've ever emailed with me. It's in my signature. Through our presentations website, we have a recorded version of this that we did for the multifamily side and for the not multifamily side. Those are both available on that presentations website. And if you need a certificate, you need to take it live, you need to get a certificate, you would want to go through the Texas Apartment Association. They are able to offer those in a real time. They have some recordings that we've done. They do those and they're interactive. So you're still getting, pretty well the full benefit of it with the polls and that sort of a thing. But you can email education@taa.org for more information on that.
Here's a verification question. In the event that we absolutely have to take a verification of employment to the employer in person, how do we verify that in the file?
Put a clarification on top of it that said, I, manager so-and-so, took this to Ross, had the manager fill it out. Manager showed me their name badge that said manager on it, just something to that effect where it shows that, you did your due diligence and you did take it and it was not hand carried by the applicant.
I'm not sure I fully understand this.
That needs to be emailed. That's a deeper thought process. If you ask hard questions, we tell you to email us. All right. We all caught up?
We are caught up on questions, but we can wait a little bit.
We can wait a couple minutes. Again, thank you guys for spending your lunch with us. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you'll complete the survey, that really helps me know, did I hit the mark? Did I miss the mark? What is, kind of what we're after. And if you have any ideas for future trainings that you would like to see, I do respond to those. For this week, because I have office hours and this, you probably won't get a response from me until next week with regards to your survey responses. But I will get back to you. And if you have a question about the 811 program, I will forward that to our 811 monitor. If you put a PFC question in there, I'm going to forward that to the PFC monitors. So if I'm not able to answer it, I will get it to the right person and do my best to get you an answer. Probably good for our July 31st.
That's a management question.
All right. I'm not sure if we've got anything new coming in. I'm seeing lots of people jump off.
Ooh. Is it acceptable to go to the business place and get the employment verification filled out if they don't have an email?
It absolutely is. If you need to go to the place of employment to get the verification filled out, I think that's perfectly reasonable. I had to do that a number of times as a property manager. What else I got? Lots of thank yous and thumbs up and hearts. I appreciate that. You guys know how to make a gal feel loved. Thank you guys. I'm going to end the recording so that we don't have dead air.